High in the cliff, 6 necks lie coiled like sleeping rope. Far below, a ship no bigger than a leaf enters the strait. Nothing moves yet. Everything is already deciding. Her name is Scylla. 6 heads, 12 claws, and a hunger that never once looks away. The ship below cannot turn back now. The strait has already narrowed too far. This is the whole story of the strait between 2 monsters, told slowly, from the very beginning. If you drift off before we clear the rocks, the sea will keep moving without you. Listen, and you can hear it, a slow pull, then a drag, then quiet. That sound belongs to the strait's other half. It has been breathing like that since before the ship was built. On the far cliff, the water is drawing itself inward, slow, patient, certain it will rise again, pull, then drag, then quiet. The strait keeps its own rhythm and waits. Odysseus has one choice to make, and no good version of it. Sail close to the cliff, and the sea will take some of his men. Sail close to the whirlpool, and it may take the ship whole. A wiser voice already warned him which side to favor. He has not told his crew which choice she made him promise. Some warnings are easier to carry alone. Maybe you know that feeling. Every path in front of you costs something, and no one will tell you which cost is smaller. The old story calls it a strait. You might call it a Tuesday. This is what we do here. Every night, one old story. Something that happened long before ships had names, and somehow still knows the shape of your week. Get comfortable now. Let your shoulders sink into wherever you're resting. If you're gone before the ship clears the strait, the old gods have watched sleepers before. This is only the beginning of the crossing. The part most people never hear the whole way through. That's still ahead of us, but not tonight. Tonight, just this. If tonight felt like something, subscribe. There's another old story waiting for tomorrow night. Same quiet hour. Now back to the strait. Days earlier, the ship rested on a different shore. Cedar smoke drifted from a low stone house. No one aboard yet knew 2 names they would soon never forget. Inside, a long table held dried herbs and bronze bowls. The woman who lived there had already seen where this voyage was going. She had drawn the strait for him in ash. There is a cliff, she told him, and a whirlpool across from it. You will not defeat either one. You can only choose which one costs you less. Scylla, she said, would take 6 men, never more, never less, always 6. Charybdis might take the whole ship, every oar, every man aboard it. Remember that number, it matters later. He asked if there was a way to fight the 6-headed one. Circe only shook her head. She is not a monster you kill, she said. She is a monster you survive. By morning the ship was loaded, the oars run out. The shore already behind them. Somewhere ahead, 6 necks were beginning to stir. The strait was waiting, and so were we. Circe's hall smelled of dried herbs and wood smoke. Odysseus sat across the long, dark table from her, and she was not smiling anymore. The warning had already begun. There is a strait ahead of you, she said. Narrow enough that oars will nearly touch the rock on both sides. You will not be able to avoid it. On one side of that water lives something with 6 heads. On the other, something with no shape at all, only a mouth wide enough to swallow your whole ship. Her name is Scylla, Circe said quietly. She was not always what she is now. That part of the story I will not tell you tonight. Somewhere in that pause, Odysseus understood there was more to the name than she would give him. He did not ask again. Not yet. The other side, Circe went on, belongs to Charybdis. She was punished long ago. Zeus's own hand did it, and the punishment never ended. 3 times a day she pulls the sea into herself. 3 times a night she gives it back. There is no safe hour, only a less terrible one. Odysseus asked the only question that mattered. If I must pass between them, which side costs less? Sail closer to Scylla, she told him. She will take 6 of your men, no more. Charybdis, if you drift too near, she takes the ship, all of it. 6. Exactly 6, every time, no more and no less. That was the part that would stay with him, that a monster could be so precise about grief. Maybe you know that kind of arithmetic. Not the kind with numbers exactly. The kind where you weigh one loss against a worse one and call the smaller loss a mercy. Will I have time to arm myself at least? He asked. Circe's answer was slow in coming, and when it came, it was not the one he wanted. "You cannot fight her," Circe said. "She is not flesh the way you understand flesh. Raise your sword and you only lose the time you needed to row past." "Row," she said. "Row as if your life depends on speed and not on courage. Because it does. Call out to her, and you only give her 6 names to choose from." He promised her he would not fight. It was an easy promise to make in a warm stone hall far from the water. Remember that for later. Outside, the crew was already loading the last jars of water and grain. They did not know yet what Circe had said. They only knew the ship was leaving at dawn. One of the older sailors, a man named Eurylochus in some tellings, asked no questions of his captain. He simply trusted the man who had brought them through worse. That trust was not small. It had carried them through a Cyclops' cave, through winds that turned against them, through an island where men became swine and were made men again. But trust is not the same as knowing. And Odysseus had not yet decided what, exactly, he would tell them, and what he would keep to himself. The sea that morning was calm, too calm, the way the last hour before rain is calm. The gulls that had followed them for days began, one by one, to turn back. Odysseus watched them go and said nothing. Some warnings arrive with words, others arrive as birds who simply refuse to fly any farther with you. By midday, a dark seam had appeared on the horizon, too straight to be a cloud, too still to be a storm. That was the first any of them saw of the strait. "What is that?" one of the younger men asked. Odysseus did not answer right away. He was still deciding how much of the truth a rowing man could carry. "A strait," he finally said. "Narrow water. We row through it, and by evening it is behind us." He did not mention the 2 names, not yet. The rule Circe gave him was simple. Do not name Scylla aloud near her waters. A name spoken at the wrong moment was its own kind of summoning. So he called it only the narrow water to his men. A small dishonesty meant kindly. Whether kindness and dishonesty can share a name, that is its own old question. The wind picked up in the early afternoon, pushing them faster than any of them wanted to go. The strait was not waiting for them to be ready. Odysseus went below to the ship's low hold, where the bronze armor was stored. He told himself he only wanted to look at it. That was the first small lie of the day. He lifted the breastplate. He thought of Circe's words, "You cannot fight her," and set it down again. Then quietly, he picked it back up. A vow is easy to keep in a warm hall. It is a different thing entirely with cliffs rising on both sides of you and the water already narrowing. The crew saw their captain in armor and understood, without being told, that whatever lay ahead was worse than narrow water. Fear moved down the benches like a current of its own. Here's the part the myths never make obvious. The armor did nothing for the men he was trying to protect. It only meant one more person watching, unable to look away. Maybe you know that feeling too. Doing something useless just so your hands have somewhere to be while you wait for the thing you cannot stop. Eurylochus came to the stern. "Captain, which side do we favor?" A simple question asked by a man who did not yet know there was no good answer. "Hug the near cliff," Odysseus said. "Stay tight against the rock." He did not say why. He did not say what waited in the cave above them. High above, in a cave the sun never quite reached, something shifted. One neck uncoiled first. The others would follow, the way a hand follows a single waking finger. On the far side of the strait, the water had already begun its slow retreat, the first pull of the day, drawing the sea back into Charybdis' throat. 2 monsters, 2 rhythms, one waking slowly limb by limb, one breathing in and out 3 times a day. Odysseus could not see either one yet. He would soon. The oars kept their steady rhythm. Pull, drag, a sound the crew had heard 1,000 times before. Tonight it sounded different to every man aboard. Stay with this, it matters before the end. That rhythm, pull and drag, would return again later in the story, in a very different water, under very different circumstances. For now, though, the ship was still in open water. The strait itself, its full narrow throat, was still an hour ahead. There was time yet to understand why this had happened at all. The Greeks who first told this story were sailors themselves. They knew this strait, the real one, between Italy and Sicily, long before they gave its currents names. Real ships were lost there, pulled under by currents that met and fought each other in that narrow gap. A monster's name was easier to carry than an explanation no one had yet. So a whirlpool became a hungry woman punished by a god. A dangerous current under a cliff became 6 barking heads with an appetite that could be counted. Sailors could not explain a current that seemed to choose its victims. A monster who took exactly 6, and no more, at least made a kind of terrible sense. That is the part worth remembering. Every old monster began as someone trying to survive something that made no sense yet. The names came after. The fear came first. Back aboard the ship, none of that history mattered anymore. What mattered was the gap ahead, narrowing by the minute, and a captain who had already broken one small promise. He had promised Circe he would not fight. He was standing there in full armor, sword drawn, already breaking it, and telling himself it was only for the men's comfort. The vow was not shattered all at once. It cracked slowly, the way a vow always does, one small justification laid over another, until the shape underneath is unrecognizable. The waiting was not empty. The waiting was the work. Every oar stroke a small act of courage. None of the men would ever think to name that way. Above them now, the cave mouth was close enough that a sharp-eyed man might have seen something pale moving in its shadow. No one looked up. Odysseus had told them not to. On the far side, the water had gone strangely flat and still. The held breath before Charybdis's next great pull. Even the gulls that remained had gone silent. This moment is easy to miss, but it changes everything. The exact instant a ship commits to one side of a strait and can no longer choose the other. There was no undoing that turn now. The ship was committed to the cliff, to whatever waited above it, and away from the wider, hungrier throat on the other side. We will come back to this exact moment later, the choice, and what it cost. For now, let's step back a little further, to before any of this began. Before she was 6 heads and 12 claws, Scylla was, in most of the old tellings, a young woman who liked to walk along a quiet shore, alone, unremarkable. A sea god loved her, in the way gods love, suddenly, entirely, without asking. She did not love him back. That refusal is where the story truly begins. The god turned to an enchantress for help winning her, the same Circe who now, generations of story later, would warn Odysseus about the very thing that enchantress made. But Circe wanted the sea god for herself. Jealousy, in the old stories, rarely helps the person it claims to be helping. She poisoned the water where the young woman bathed. She was not punishing herself. She told herself she was only removing a rival. That is how most cruelty begins, as a story someone tells themselves to feel less cruel. When the young woman waded into that water to bathe, as she had every evening of her life, something in her began, slowly and irreversibly, to change. She screamed when the first head broke free at her waist. In some tellings she ran, into the sea, into the cliffs, into whatever would hide her from her own reflection. The cave did not change her all at once. It gave her nowhere else to run, and after enough time in the dark, running stopped being something she needed to do. That is the human part, not the famous part. The part with 6 heads and teeth in rows, just a woman who was punished for someone else's love and never forgiven for surviving it. Circe never told that part of the story to Odysseus. Perhaps some guilt does not survive the telling. Perhaps she simply did not think he needed it to make his choice. Charybdis's story began differently. Not with jealousy, but with hunger, and a god who could not forgive an appetite that reached too far above its station. She had eaten entire herds belonging to Zeus's own family, great mouthfuls of land and cattle at once, a hunger no ordinary punishment could satisfy or contain. Zeus struck her down with his own thunderbolt and threw her into the strait, but he could not undo the hunger. He could only give it a different shape to live inside. So the hunger became the sea itself, 3 times a day, forever. Not cruelty exactly, more like a debt that could never be paid down, only repeated. 2 women. 2 punishments that outlasted the crimes they answered for. Neither Scylla nor Charybdis asked to become what waited in that strait for every ship after them. The old stories knew this, that monsters are rarely born monstrous. Something happens to them first. We only meet them afterward, already finished, already named. None of this made the strait ahead any less dangerous for the men rowing toward it. Understanding a monster's grief does not soften its teeth. We'll return to that narrow water soon, the choice, the 6 names, the sound the sea makes when it swallows something whole. But first, the crew deserves their own moment. They were not heroes in the way Odysseus was a hero. They were fishermen, farmers, younger sons with no land of their own, ordinary men a long way from home. They had followed Odysseus for 10 years now, through a war and everything after it. Home was closer than it had ever been, and further away than they wanted to admit. Some of them would not see home at all. None of them knew that yet, rowing steady toward a gap in the rock they still believed was only narrow water. The crown was not heavy because it was gold, and neither was Odysseus's command heavy because of any weapon. It was heavy because every man behind him leaned on his next decision. Departure into the narrow water was no longer a choice ahead of them. It was the water they were already inside. The cliffs closed overhead like a door finishing its swing shut. Somewhere above, 6 necks had fully uncoiled now, though none of the men below could see them yet. The cave's shadow hid what it needed to hide. Odysseus did not look up. He had promised himself he would not, that if he never saw her coming, he could not be blamed for failing to stop it. What happens next is the reason this story survived 3,000 years. Not because of what the monster did, because of what the captain chose not to do. But that moment is still ahead of us tonight. For now, let's step back once more, to the last quiet hour before the ship ever reached this narrow water at all. That last evening at sea, before the cliffs appeared, Odysseus had gathered his crew and told them, finally, something closer to the truth. "There are 2 dangers ahead," he said. "One is fast, one is slow. I have chosen which one we will face, and I will not explain the choice tonight." A younger sailor asked anyway, "Will we all survive it?" Odysseus looked at him for a long moment before answering, "Most of you. I cannot promise more than that." No one spoke after that. The silence on deck was not fear exactly. It was the particular quiet of men deciding, together, to keep rowing anyway. That night, before sleep took the crew, Odysseus stood alone at the stern and remembered another shore, gray, ash-lit, where he had once spoken with the dead. A blind prophet had warned him then, in that gray place, of dangers still to come, a strait, a choice, a loss he could not avoid however carefully he sailed. The prophet's warning had been vague on purpose, the way warnings from the dead often are, enough to prepare him, never enough to spare him. Cold memory, a warning already paid for in ways he had not fully understood at the time. He understood it better now, with the strait only a night's sail away. He did not tell the crew about the prophecy either. Some warnings he had decided were his alone to carry. That too would prove to be its own kind of mistake. Maybe you know that feeling, carrying something heavy alone because you believe, wrongly or rightly, that sharing it would only make it heavier for everyone else. Dawn came gray and quiet. The wind had shifted in the night, pushing them faster toward the strait than any of them had planned to travel. By mid-morning, the dark seam on the horizon had become unmistakably 2 cliffs, close enough now that the gap between them looked impossibly narrow. This is the part where we could rush ahead to the strait itself, but the old stories knew that some doors open inward first, through a little more waiting. Odysseus called Eurylochus to his side one final time before the cliffs closed around them. "Whatever happens," he said, "keep the men rowing, do not let them stop." "Whatever you hear," Odysseus added, "whatever you see happen above you, do not stop rowing, not for a moment, not even to look." Eurylochus did not ask what he meant. He had rowed with this captain long enough to know that some instructions were kindest left unexplained until they were needed. The ship entered the shadow of the cliffs at last. The temperature dropped. The light thinned to a single gray shaft falling straight down between the rock walls. Above, in the cave, 6 pale eyes opened at once. Below, in the deep, the water had begun its long, slow retreat once more, drawing everything inward. We are close now to that narrow water, closer than we have been all night, but not quite there yet. There is still time to breathe if you need it. If you drift off here, in this shadow between 2 waiting monsters, that is all right. The strait will still be here when you wake. It always is. The current shifted beneath the hull, a small tug at first, then a stronger pull that made the ship list slightly toward the far side of the strait. "Hold the near line," he called out. "Do not let her pull us toward the middle." The men leaned harder into their oars, fighting a current that wanted them elsewhere. The pull was Charybdis's doing, though none of them could see her yet. Her hunger reached farther than her own visible waters, an invisible hand under the whole strait. They held the line barely. The ship steadied, hugging the near cliff so closely now that spray from the rock face misted across the deck. This is the part most people never reach in the telling. The strait is not one danger, but two, pulling at a ship from opposite directions at once. Safety from one meant danger from the other. There was no line down the middle of that water that belonged to neither of them. There never had been. The old stories knew that some doors open inward, and this strait was exactly that kind of door. No matter which way they turned, something would be let in. Above them, unseen, 6 heads had begun to lower slowly from the cave mouth, patient the way only something that has waited centuries can be patient. This moment is easy to miss, but it changes everything. The strait was no longer simply narrow water. It had become a held breath, and the ship was inside it. What happens next is the reason this story survived 3,000 years, but it has not happened yet. Not tonight, not in this telling. Let's stay here a little longer. Below deck in the ship's low hold, a young sailor prayed quietly to a god he was not sure was listening. Most of the crew, that hour, were praying to someone. Fear grips the mortal heart in a strait like this differently than it grips it in open battle. There is no enemy to strike back at, only water and waiting. Odysseus moved down the center of the deck once, briefly touching a shoulder here, saying a name there. Small things, the only things a captain could still give them. He did not know their names for comfort's sake alone. He knew them because he had chosen every one of them himself years ago on a different shore entirely. That was the part of command no one warned him about all those years before the war began. Not the fighting, the remembering afterward of who had trusted him and why. The ship crept forward another length, then another. The gap between the cliffs was narrowing further still, the walls now close enough to touch on both sides at once. Somewhere behind them now, though none looked back to see it, the open sea they had left was already a distant, forgotten kind of freedom. There was no turning back now, not with the current running as it was, not with both walls so close. Whatever waited ahead, they were already inside its reach. We are almost there now, almost to that narrow water where 6 heads wait above, and a hungry throat waits across from them. Almost, but not quite yet. Stay with this a little longer. Not because the danger is not real, because the waiting too is part of the story, and the waiting deserves to be told slowly. A single drop of water fell from the cave far above and struck the deck near Odysseus's foot. He looked down at it before he understood what it meant. It was not rain. There was no rain in that narrow, shadowed strait. It had fallen from somewhere directly above the ship, somewhere with a mouth and teeth and patience. Odysseus's hand found his sword hilt at last, the promise to Circe finally, fully broken. He did not draw it yet, but his fingers no longer remembered the vow. On the far side of the strait, the water level had dropped further still, black rock and old bones of long-lost ships briefly visible at Charybdis's shrinking throat. What the strait means is not complicated, though it took every man aboard that ship a lifetime to understand it fully. Some choices do not have a right side. You choose the loss you can survive, and you carry it afterward, and you do not pretend it was a victory. That is the entire lesson the strait has to offer. Sailors who lived through real straits like this one understood it long before the poets gave it names. The sea does not care which choice you make, only that you make one. The old stories knew that some doors open inward, and that choosing which door to open does not remove the cost of what waits behind it. It only decides the shape of the cost. That is the part worth carrying with you into sleep tonight. If nothing else survives until morning, the shape of the cost is still a choice. That much at least remains yours. The ship moved on, deeper into the strait's narrowest reach. Above, the first neck lowered fully into the light. Below, the water had begun at last its return. A sound reached the deck then. Low, wet, deliberate. Not a roar, something quieter and somehow worse. The sound of something very large deciding to move. "Row," Odysseus shouted, the word tearing loose from him at last. "Row and do not stop, whatever you hear behind you." The oars surged forward as one. This is the part most people never reach in the telling, the actual moment before the loss, when speed is the only prayer left that anyone can still act on. We will not finish this passing tonight. Not yet. What happens between the cliffs deserves its own telling later, when the ship has had time to gather itself first. For now, let's rest here a moment. In the sound of the oars, the cold shadow of the cliffs, the strange quiet under all that noise. It is almost over. Almost. Circe had told him it would be fast. She had not told him how fast, how little time there would be between the first sound and the first scream. A shadow passed over the deck, quick, low, gone before anyone could name it. The first neck had struck, and missed, and was already withdrawing to strike again. "Keep rowing," Odysseus screamed, his own vow to Circe entirely forgotten now, his sword finally, uselessly drawn. He knew already it would change nothing. "We will pause here, just before the worst of it. The rest of this passing, what the Strait finally takes, and what it leaves behind is a story for tomorrow night. For tonight, let the ship stay exactly here, between the cliffs, between the two names, between one breath and the next. That is enough for now. That is enough. Let's leave the Strait a moment longer and drift back to something gentler, the quiet hours before any of this began, when the crew still believed the sea only carried them forward. On Circe's island, before any of them had heard the word Strait, the crew had spent one last easy evening on the sand, telling old stories of home. Odysseus had sat apart from them that night, closer to the water, turning Circe's warning over and over in his mind without yet finding a way to make peace with it. He was not punishing himself with the silence. He was resting, the last rest he would allow himself before the choice that was already quietly deciding itself. Circe found him there near midnight and sat beside him without a word for a long while. Some warnings are better given in silence first and words after. "I am sorry," she said finally, "for the Strait, for what it will cost you." He did not ask her what she meant by sorry. Later he wished he had. That is the part worth remembering here, before we return to the narrow water tomorrow, that even the one who warned him carried her own quiet guilt about the cost. We have been between two monsters a long while tonight. It is enough, for now, to know they are still there, waiting, the way old stories always wait for us to return. This is what we do here, night after night. We sit with an old story a while, and let it breathe, and trust that the ending will still be there when we need it. Sleep now, if you're ready. The Strait will still be narrow tomorrow. The heads will still be 6. The Whirlpool will still be breathing, patient as it has always been. The crew loaded the last jars of water at dawn, Circe's island still quiet behind them, dew still heavy on the ropes. The smell of pitch and wet pine rose from the hull. Somewhere behind them, smoke was already curling up from Circe's cold hearth. "Remember the vow," Circe had said at the tide line. She had not said what it would cost him to keep it. She rarely did. By mid-morning the island was only a green smudge behind them. Ahead, the sea opened wide and gray, and no one spoke of what waited in it. The men rowed easily at first, relief at leaving one danger behind, not yet knowing they were only rowing toward another. Odysseus walked the length of the deck once, counting ropes, counting men, counting oars, 12 of each, though he counted the men twice. Salt spray began to reach the deck by afternoon, the wind stiffening, the sail finally taking its full shape above them. "What's the sound she warned us of?" one of the younger men asked. No one answered him. No one had heard it yet. The wind shifted twice before dusk, each time toward the same direction, as if something ahead were slowly, patiently pulling the ship in. A hush settled over the benches as the light failed. 12 men rowed in silence, and the silence itself began to feel like a decision. They anchored that first night in open water, no shore in sight, and took turns keeping watch against nothing they could name. Odysseus did not sleep that night. He sat with the whetstone in his hand, though the blade had not needed sharpening in weeks. By the second morning, the sea had changed color, darker, denser, as though something beneath it were holding its breath. Someone on the bow pointed first, a dark seam far ahead where the horizon should have been open. No one needed to ask what it was. The gulls thinned first, then vanished entirely. A ship without gulls, Odysseus had learned, was a ship already being watched by something larger. This is the part the myth rarely slows down for, The hours of ordinary rowing before the danger has a shape. Stay with it a while longer. By the third day, the seam had become two shapes, twin cliffs, dark and close together, like a door only barely open. The sound reached them before the cliffs did, a low, rhythmic pull and drag, like something enormous breathing very slowly, very far away. "That's her," someone whispered, though no one had told him which monster made which sound. Some fears, it seems, do not need to be taught. Odysseus said nothing yet about the whetstone, or the blade, or the plan already forming in him that broke the promise he had made. Maybe you know that feeling, the plan you make quietly, alone, because saying it aloud would only make someone try to stop you. The cliffs rose sheer and gray from the water now, close enough that the men could see the dark stains streaking one of them. On the far side, the water moved differently, drawing inward in a slow, wide circle, patient as a held breath before speech. Odysseus had noticed that tree once, in passing, when Circe first drew the strait for him in the sand. He had not asked why she pointed at it. That is a detail worth keeping for later. Not every object in an old story announces its purpose the first time it appears. The rhythmic pull and drag sound grew louder now, no longer distant, close enough that the men felt it in the timbers beneath their feet. "Which side do we favor, Captain?" the steersman finally asked. Odysseus did not answer at once. Both answers he knew would cost him something. "We have arrived, tonight, at the question this whole story keeps circling back to. What do you do when every path in front of you takes something? There is no need to answer it tonight. The old story has not answered it yet either, not for another 100 segments at least." They anchored a second night just outside the strait's reach, close enough to hear it breathing, too far, still, for it to reach them. No one slept easily. Every so often, the low pull and drag sound rose, then faded, then rose again, a rhythm none of them could stop listening for. By morning, 3 of the younger men refused to look toward the strait at all. Fear, like anything else, needed somewhere to put itself. Odysseus gathered them at the mast before they raised anchor. He told them what Circe had said. Not all of it. Enough. "There is a monster on each side," he said. "We cannot fight either. We can only choose which side costs us less." He did not tell them Scylla's name yet, or how many heads she had. Some truths, he had decided, arrive easier in smaller pieces. He chose her side. "Fewer men lost than ships lost entirely," Circe had said. He did not yet know what fewer would mean in practice. The anchor came up slow and heavy, water streaming from the rope. There was no ceremony to it. There rarely is, at the start of the worst days. The oars bit into the water, 12 strokes falling into rhythm. 12 men rowed the ship of a captain who had already chosen who would pay. The cliffs closed in fast now, faster than the men expected. What had looked distant an hour ago now filled half the sky. "This is what we do here, night after night. Sit inside the slow parts of old stories and trust the ending to wait for us." The rowing changed once they entered the strait's shadow. Shorter strokes, tighter grips, no man's eyes leaving the water in front of him. The current turned strange here, pulling one way and then another, as though the sea itself could not decide which monster it belonged to. Odysseus went below without a word and came back armed, helmet, shield, 2 long spears, every piece of the vow already broken in his hands. He knew what Circe had told him, that no blade would touch her, that fighting only cost more time and more men. He armed himself anyway. You may know that feeling too, doing the useless thing anyway, because standing still and doing nothing felt like the worst kind of losing. The far cliff's water pulled inward now visibly, a wide, slow spiral drawing the sea down towards something dark at its center. The steersman corrected hard away from it, and the ship swung closer to the cliff on the other side, exactly as the choice required. No one had told the youngest rowers why the ship was suddenly hugging the near cliff. They only knew to grip their oars tighter. Remember the tree above the whirlpool, and the whetstone, and the count of ropes done twice. Not every thread in this story has been pulled yet. The rhythmic sound was very close now, not a distant breathing anymore, but a wet, heavy pull that shook the timbers underfoot. Odysseus stood at the bow with his spears raised, watching the high cave mouth above them for any sign of movement. For a long moment, nothing happened. The ship crept forward under the cliff, and the silence stretched thinner than any of them liked. This is easy to miss, but it matters. The waiting is not empty in this story. The waiting is where the fear does its worst work. High above, in the dark of her cave, 6 long necks began very slowly to uncoil from where they had lain nested against the stone. She had felt the ship long before she saw it, the way you feel a step on a stair before you hear it creak. This part of the story asks something of us too, to sit with the dread a while before the story lets it resolve into anything. The oldest man aboard, a rower named Paramedes, had sailed this coast twice before. He had never once come this close to the cliff. He said nothing about it now. Odysseus had told him once quietly to watch the cave and say nothing to the younger men. Paramedes had agreed without asking why. That is another thread to keep. A captain choosing silence for his men, even as he armed himself for a fight he could not win. The ship reached the deepest shadow of the cliff, where the sun could no longer find the water, and the sound above them changed. It was not a roar. It was closer to a rustle, 6 long bodies moving against stone, patient, unhurried, in no rush at all to be seen. Below, none of the rowers looked up. They had been told to keep their eyes on the water, and for now, every one of them obeyed. Only Odysseus watched the cave now, spears ready, certain in his bones that watching would somehow be enough to protect them. It would not be. That is the part worth remembering. Sometimes the watching itself is the last kindness a person can offer, even when it changes nothing. Far across the strait, the whirlpool drew its breath inward one more time, low and hollow, and the fig tree above it did not stir. We will stay here a while longer, between the two of them, because that is exactly where this story lives, in the narrow space between 2 coasts. The ship's forward progress felt slower now, though the men rowed no differently. Fear, it turns out, has its own way of measuring time. Somewhere near the middle bench, a young man began to hum, very low, the same 3 notes his mother used to sing over a cradle. No one told him to stop. Some fears are easier to carry with a little sound attached to them, even a sound as small as that. Remember that hum for later. Small sounds, in old stories, have a way of returning right when the silence becomes unbearable. The ship was nearly halfway through the narrowest part of the strait now, close enough to the cliff to touch it with an oar. Paramedes was the first to see her, a pale shape shifting deep inside the cave mouth, low and half-hidden, watching them pass. He did not shout. He only touched Odysseus's arm once and pointed. Some warnings are quieter than the danger they describe. 6 pale eyes opened in the cave's shadow, one after another, like lamps being lit down a long, dark hall. This is the part the myths never make obvious. How long the watching lasts before anything happens. It can feel like the whole of a life. The steersman held the course as steady as his hands allowed, though the current kept pulling them a hand's width closer to the rock. Somewhere behind them, the whirlpool's breathing deepened again, and for one strange moment both sounds, cave and current, rose together. The young man's humming faltered and stopped. Somewhere in the silence that followed, everyone aboard understood the same thing without saying it. They were not going to pass through unseen. They had known that, in some quiet corner of themselves, since the gulls first disappeared. Get comfortable now, if you haven't already. Whatever happens next in this old story, it happened a long time ago, and it is only a story tonight. Odysseus lifted his spears higher, ready at last for the fight Circe had warned him a spear could never win. High above, 6 necks began to unfold at once, stretching long and impossibly fast over open air toward the water below. A shout went up from the bow. Every man froze for half a heartbeat, the last still moment before the story changes shape entirely. We will not rush this moment either. It deserves to be told slowly, the way the old poets always told it, carefully and with respect. Before we go further into the strike itself, it is worth pausing, the way the old storytellers always paused, to ask why this story was told at all. Sailors along this coast knew this water long before Homer gave it 2 names. Real currents here really did pull ships and men under. Giving the danger a face and a hunger did not make it less real. It made it easier to speak of, and easier to survive telling. A monster with 6 heads can be planned around, A current with no name and no shape cannot. That is the quiet use of an old story. The lesser wreck, sailors called it, choosing Scylla's side on purpose, because 6 men lost was survivable, and a whole ship swallowed whole was not. That is the choice Odysseus made too, long before we met him tonight. Not the brave choice, not the clever one, only the survivable one. Now, back to the Strait, where 6 long necks were already falling, fast and sure, toward a ship that could not outrun them. Odysseus thrust both spears upward with everything he had. Neither blade found flesh, neither blade was ever going to. Circe had been right, and being right had cost her nothing. It cost Odysseus everything he had hoped his spears could buy back. 6 men were gone before the rest could even shout their names. The oars they had held lay rocking gently, empty, against the benches. This is the part the myths never soften, and we won't soften it either, only tell it slowly, so it can be carried gently instead of sharply. High above in the shadow of her cave, Scylla fed. It was not cruelty, it was only the shape her hunger had always taken. The remaining 6 rowers kept rowing, because the ship was still moving through danger, and grief, however heavy, could not be allowed to stop the oars yet. Maybe you know that too. The strange, terrible discipline of continuing to move, hands still working, while the worst part of you wants only to stop. Behind them, the Whirlpool gave one last low pull, as if disappointed at what it had not been given, and then began slowly to still. The Strait was behind them now. Ahead lay open water, and a silence heavier than any storm the ship had ever sailed through. No one spoke for a long while. 6 benches sat empty, and no one moved to fill them, as though that alone might undo something. Odysseus sat down at last near the stern, the spears he had never truly needed lying useless across his knees. This was not the ending Circe had promised him, only the ending she had warned him could not be avoided, no matter what he tried. We have reached a strange kind of victory tonight, a ship still afloat, a captain still breathing, and 6 names that will not be spoken again for a while. Some old stories call this a triumph. We will let it rest tonight as something quieter than that, a survival carried carefully and grieved properly. They sailed on through the evening without raising the sail, the oars moving slow and steady, more out of habit now than urgency. Paramedes, who had first seen her in the shadow, kept glancing back once every few strokes, as though checking that the cliffs had truly let them go. It had. But something in the sea ahead had already begun to change, though none of them, not even Odysseus, had noticed it yet. Remember that light for later. Not every danger in this story announces itself with a roar. Some arrive dressed as something beautiful. For tonight we will let the ship drift quietly on, and let the men rest their oars, and let the Strait stay finally, mercifully behind them. Odysseus did not sleep that night either, though this time it was not the whetstone that kept him awake, but the 6 names he could not stop counting. By dawn the strange gold-green light on the horizon had not faded. If anything, it had grown a little clearer, a little closer. Someone said it looked like an island catching fire in the sunrise. Someone else said it looked like nothing they had ever seen sunlight do before. We will not chase that light tonight. It belongs to a part of the story still ahead of us. One more shore, one more warning, one more choice. For now, let us turn back, just a little, to understand what this whole crossing meant, before we let the ship carry us any further. He had chosen the lesser wreck, exactly as Circe told him to. He had not understood until now that lesser did not mean small. Maybe you know that feeling too, making the responsible choice, and discovering only afterward how much responsibility can weigh, once it is finally paid. The remaining crew did not blame him. That, somehow, made the weight heavier still, a captain forgiven for a choice he had not truly wanted to make. This is what old stories understand that lessons rarely do, that surviving the impossible choice does not erase what the choice cost, it only lets you keep carrying it. Sleep a little, if the story has carried you this far already. The sea ahead is calm for now, and calm, tonight, is enough to rest inside. Days passed calmly after that, the sea gentle, the wind kind, as though even the ocean understood the ship needed a while to heal. The 6 empty benches were filled again eventually, not with new men, but with coiled rope and stacked jars, a practical kind of forgetting. Odysseus began sharpening the whetstone again, though this time out of habit, not dread. Some tools, it turns out, are steadying simply to hold. The gold-green glow on the horizon had not vanished. It simply waited there, day after day, a little larger each time they glanced its way. That is something worth keeping too. How a danger can sit quietly on the horizon for days, patient, waiting for a ship to finally arrive at it. One evening, Charybdis finally asked what was troubling the captain most, the strait behind them or the light still waiting ahead. Both, Odysseus admitted, the strait for what it took, the light for what it might still ask of us. Charybdis nodded and said nothing more. That night the sea stayed calm, and the 6 names stayed quiet, and for the first time since the strait, Odysseus slept without waking once. We will let him have that rest, at least before the story turns toward whatever is waiting inside that gold-green light on the horizon. Before we sail any closer to that light, it's worth asking a quieter question: why a story like this one gets told again and again for centuries. This story survived because it was useful. A traveler could carry it from harbor to harbor, and every listener understood the shape of it instantly. Everyone, everywhere, has stood between 2 coasts at some point. That is why the story travels so easily. It was never only about one strait. Homer wrote it down eventually, but the story had already crossed 100 mouths and 100 fires before his hand ever touched it. That is worth remembering, gently, before we return to Odysseus. Every old story we tell tonight was first kept alive by ordinary people, around ordinary fires. Back aboard the ship, the gold-green light had grown close enough now to see clearly, not fire at all, but a whole coastline strangely glowing. We will not land there tonight. That shore, and whatever waits on it, belongs to a story still further ahead of us. For now, only the glow. Instead, let us turn the ship gently back toward that first cave mouth and ask what kind of creature Scylla truly was before all of this. In one telling, she was once a girl, sea-loved, laughing, gathering shells along a shore not so different from the one glowing ahead of them now. A jealous rival poisoned the water where she bathed, and the girl who loved the sea became something the sea itself could no longer hold gently. We won't say who the rival was tonight. That name belongs to another old story, tangled up in this one the way roots tangle underground. What matters more tonight is this: Scylla did not choose her hunger. She woke inside it one morning, already changed, already unable to go back. Maybe that is the quiet ache underneath this whole story. A monster who never asked to be one, still doing, every day, the only thing she knows how to do. Charybdis too had once been someone else, a daughter of the sea, cursed by a god for reasons that changed depending on who told the story. In every version, the punishment fit the same shape, an endless hunger, drawing everything toward her and never once being allowed to keep it. We will remember that tree once more for later. It has not finished its part in this story, not by a long way. Aboard the ship, the days kept passing, gentle and uneventful, until the glowing coastline finally filled the whole horizon in front of them. Odysseus stood at the bow a long while, watching the light without moving to land the ship. Something about it made him hesitate more than the strait had. That hesitation is worth keeping too. Tonight, a captain who fought a 6-headed danger without flinching, unsettled instead by nothing but a strange, quiet light. We will leave him there for tonight, bow raised, eyes fixed on a golden shore he has not yet chosen to trust. That is the whole shape of this part of the story. One danger survived, one debt paid in 6 names, and one new light still waiting to be understood. Let us drift back one more time, gently, to the strait itself, because there is still more to understand about what happened there and why. Circe had told Odysseus one more thing that day on the shore, something he had not repeated to the crew, or to Charybdis, or even fully to himself. "You will pass this way again," she had said, "before the end of your journey home." He had not asked her to explain. He had not wanted to know. Remember that promise for later? Not every warning in this old story has finished doing its work. Some warnings simply wait, the way the fig tree waits. For now, the ship rests just short of that glowing coastline, and the 6 men who did not survive the strait rest somewhere the story has not followed them. That is enough of the strait for tonight. We have carried it slowly, the way it deserves, and we will let it rest now too. Odysseus finally gave the order to row toward shore at first light, though something in his voice, Paramedes noted, still did not sound fully certain. The shore, when they finally reached it, glowed not from fire but from a strange herd of pale cattle grazing along low golden hills. We will not go ashore with them tonight. That story, the cattle, the hunger, the choice still to come, belongs to the next part of this journey. For tonight, let this be enough. A ship that survived the narrow water, a captain still carrying 6 names, and a new shore glowing quietly ahead. This is the part we do here, night after night. We let one old story rest before the next danger, however close, is allowed to begin. Get comfortable again if you've drifted a little. This next stretch moves slowly too. There is no need to hold on tightly to every word. In the quiet of that anchored night, Odysseus finally spoke the 6 names aloud, once each, softly, to no one but the sea. That is not something the old poems record, but it feels true, doesn't it, that a captain would need at least once to say the names out loud. Maybe you know that feeling too, needing to say a hard thing once, quietly, to no one in particular, just so it has been said. He slept after that, finally and fully, and did not dream of the cave, or the claws, or the 6 pale eyes opening one by one. This is what we do here. Every night, we let the hardest part be spoken once gently, and then we let sleep finally take its turn. If tonight's old story has felt like something worth returning to, you know already what to do. There will be another night, another old story, waiting. We will pick the thread back up soon, gently, and follow it forward. The cattle, the hunger, the vow that will not hold, and the strait waiting a second time. But that thread, and that second crossing, belong to a night still ahead of us. Tonight, we have only just crossed the strait once, and that is enough. At first light, the ship finally turned its bow fully toward the golden shore, oars dipping slow and steady into calm morning water. Odysseus gathered the crew once more before landing, and this time he did not soften a single word of what Circe had told him about this shore. "Touch nothing that grazes on that shore," he said. "Whatever hunger comes, we will not feed it there." No one asked him why. Not yet. Remember that vow too, for later. This story is not finished testing what a hungry man can be asked, honestly, to resist. The ship touched the golden shore gently, and for one whole quiet morning, nothing in this story asked anything of anyone at all. But that peace was borrowed, the way all peace in this story has been. Let us turn back one final time, tonight to the strait itself, to finish what began there. In the moment the 6 necks fell, Paramedes had done something no one aboard had noticed until now. He had counted the strike himself, silently, twice. He had counted 6 necks fall, and 6 men taken, 1 for each, and understood in that instant that the number could not have been any smaller. 6 heads, 6 men, not 1 more, not 1 less. Some cruelty, it turns out, follows its own exact and terrible arithmetic. That is the part worth sitting with tonight. Not the horror of the strike, but the terrible fairness hidden inside it. 6 heads, 6 names, no more. Somewhere in that exactness lived a kind of mercy, small, cold, easy to miss, but a mercy still. It could have been the whole crew. It was not. Circe had known this exact number before the ship ever left her shore. She had chosen not to say it aloud because some numbers are kinder unspoken. That is the final thread we will leave hanging tonight, gently, a goddess who knew the exact cost of a warning and chose to give it anyway. The strait behind them, the golden shore beneath them, and 6 names carried quietly forward. That is where we will rest tonight, between 2 costs, safely on this side of both. This is what we do here, night after night. We sit with the whole cost of an old story, gently until it no longer feels sharp to carry. Sleep now, if the strait has finally let you go too. The cliffs are behind us tonight, the whirlpool is resting, the cave is quiet and still. Somewhere far off, the golden herd sleeps too, and the ship rests gently on the sand, and Odysseus, for once, is not the only one keeping watch. We will return to this shore soon, to the cattle, and the hunger that follows, and the second crossing Circe already promised him, but not tonight. If tonight's story has felt like something worth returning to, you already know what to do. There will be another night and another old story, waiting quietly for you. Rest now, between two monsters, safely on this quiet shore. The strait will still be narrow tomorrow. The whirlpool will still be patient. The story will still be waiting.